The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Welcome to a new episode of the Canola School. I am Lyndsey Smith, and joining me is David Kaminski. He's the field crop pathologist with Manitoba Agriculture. Welcome here, David.
Thank you, Lyndsey. I'm glad to be with you today.
Okay, so on Canola School here on Real Agriculture, clubroot is one of those things, of course, we've been following for years. We've been covering for years, but it is still a disease that A, is still very devastating, B, on the move, and C, I don't know if we really do have the greatest handle on management or finding it or all of those things. And so bring it together for us then, specifically, I suppose, for the Manitoba audience, but are we really prepared for scouting and for finding this disease and for managing for it?
Well, it's always important to be talking about something, especially a root disease that is, for the most part, hidden until it's showing symptoms above ground. And by then, the spore concentration in the soil is very high, and it will take a long time to draw that down. This kind of came to my attention at Ag Days in January when another journalist said, you talked about clubroot in your talk, David. You mentioned there was a symptomatic case that came to light through the general canola disease survey this year. But I haven't been hearing about clubroot much over the last 10 years. And what's the current status? Have we got it under control? And I had to scratch my head a bit. And I think there are some things that give Manitoba a little bit of an advantage when it comes to the management of clubroot. First of all, it became a big problem in Alberta in the early 2000s. We did not begin to see symptomatic cases until 2013. And in the 10 years since, we've probably documented about 40 fields or so that were symptomatic. I'm sure that there are others out there because a lot of times those are brought to our attention by people working in the field, either producers themselves or agronomists. But we track pretty carefully, and we have been producing maps since 2015, which show not just the distribution of symptomatic cases, but those rural municipalities that have had soil tests that indicate the pathogen is there at a concerning level above the detection limits. So that's been going on for quite a few years as well.
Is there, beyond geography, being further away from Alberta than Saskatchewan, let's say, it's not carried on the wind, it's carried with soil.
Correct.
But
yeah.
Is there something about Manitoba that has kept it at a lower level, or is it just that we're just catching up to Alberta's got 20 years of experience, Manitoba's only got the 10. Is there something about Manitoba that makes it different?
Well, that's a good question. I know that the pathogen thrives in wetter conditions, and Manitoba is in the eastern prairies, so we're known to be traditionally wetter than the rest of the prairie region. However, in the last 6 years, it's been pretty dry, and that might be something that is holding back the expression of symptoms, perhaps. Another thing that maybe isn't all that important is the pH of the soil. An acidic soil is favorable. So one of the cases that we found was actually in a peaty soil, which would be an acid type of soil. And in that field, it was corner to corner, whereas in many of the other fields, it's in the lower depressional areas where water stands. It will often be at the entrances or the access to a field. If it had been tracked in there on equipment, mud on tires and cultivators and that sort of thing. But you're right, it is pretty well corner to corner in distribution. And I think the areas that are really hot spots, we have one in south central Manitoba. The RMs of Lorne, Louise, and Pembina have all had multiple cases. And we know there that the rotation they use is pretty tight. A lot of growers, it's just wheat canola,
Mm-hmm.
and that isn't really a rotation, is not one that's going to limit the buildup of the pathogen.
Mm-hmm.
I want to get back to one of the things that's been an advantage for Manitoba, and that is that when a problem is identified in the canola industry, there's a lot of work that goes into breeding. And we've come a long way in the use of resistant varieties. I'm looking at the top 10 by acreage in Manitoba, and it's like 8 out of 10 of them are clubroot resistant varieties. And that wasn't the case back in the early 2000s. Everything we had was considered susceptible.
Right.
But there are now beginning to be more and more varieties that have so-called second generation resistance. There is still a little bit of hesitance or reluctance in the industry to report exactly the resistant status of the varieties, but most of them are listed as resistant. And we're using those. I think that also limits the impact of the disease over time.